Hello and welcome back to Project Posterity. My name's Philip and this is the third episode in our series entitled Undercleave Life with Grandpa. In this episode we hear about how Granny and Grandpa sold the North Downs clinic and moved down to Devon to farm. Granny discusses renovating the farm, which coincided with the wedding of her eldest daughter Deirdre, how she and Grandpa adjusted to farming life, and Grandpa's last days at Undercleave. So sit back, relax and enjoy the episode.
So this is part 3 of Project Posterity, and here we're looking at Undercleave life with Grandpa from 1982 to 2002, so it's a 20-year period. And I've got Granny here across the table from me and also her daughter Deirdre. So Granny, we thought we would start with just asking you about how did you end up moving from running a clinic in London to ending up on a farm in North Devon, in the middle of nowhere basically? How did that sort of come about?
Well, it came about because David, ever since he was a boy, wanted to do farming, but he also equally badly wanted to do surgery. And the end result was he did both. We came, having run the clinic for 11 years, I certainly had enough. It was very hard work. And it was successful. A lot of surgeons, I can't remember how many now, but probably about another 5, were using it from time to time and bringing in the income. David was no longer working in the National Health Service, but he was doing private work himself at the clinic. But more and more, he was thinking that he wanted to get out of it altogether and at least live in the country and hopefully buy himself a farm. That was his ambition. So we started to look in the spring of 1981.
So a year before you...
Yeah, that's right. Sort of vaguely. I was more anxious than he was. I mean, he had a reasonably successful business, but I'd absolutely had enough. And, you know, he went along with that. That was fine. So there was this property in Devon, which we often passed because David was at school in Devon. And the road to get to Bideford that we came along followed the River Torridge inland quite a way. And this house, you could see from the road, standing on its own, a lovely white Georgian-style house with land around it. And for as long as David was at school there, we used to say, oh, that looks nice. We would like that. We wouldn't mind living there. Never dreaming that we would actually end up there.
This was son David.
Yes, son David. Yes, it is a bit confusing, isn't it? That.
Oh, David's your son, David.
Yeah.
So you could specify.
Anyway, so it came about. I don't remember now how we saw it. We might have seen it in the paper, but I don't remember. Saw that it was on the market. I don't remember how we initially came down to have a look at it. Anyway, we decided that was it, and we started to make moves of getting rid of the clinic, selling it off, we hoped, to another medical person who would take it on. But that was quite difficult because you didn't want the staff to know that you were looking for something else. But there were all these surgeons which we felt probably would be interested if they knew that it was going to be up for sale. Anyway, we had a lot of help from our accountants on this point and so on, and somehow we managed to get in touch with a developer. We had 2 acres of very valuable land in Caterham where the clinic was. So we knew that we had something that should sell quite well, whether it stayed as a clinic or whether they pulled it down and developed it. So after hunting for, I suppose, about 6 months, and we hadn't found a medical buyer for it or a businessman, we decided to get in touch with this developer, and we were on the point of selling to him. We had bought Undercleave at an auction.
Didn't you tell me there was a bit of a bidding war?
There was a bidding war. I can't tell that just in a second, perhaps. It was sold at auction, and that was fine. And the business with the developer was going along nicely too, and that was fine. And we eventually were on the point of signing to the developer and we were on the point of paying for Undercleave. So we felt these things were going rather well. We were going to get our money in time to buy Undercleave at the auction and so on. However, Father went, husband David went down to Devon before me to get ready for the auction. And I followed about a couple of days later. I was leaving, I thought then. And so the car was packed full, and I was setting off rather late in the day, about 5 o'clock. Went down to the town to stock up with food, and parked the car in the car park in Catesham. And lo and behold, the developer himself was in the car park as well. And he said to me, "Oh, I'm so glad I've seen you." He said, "Because the deal is off." just like that, with the auction coming up. So I don't know what my reply was. Probably not really an awful lot. I came down to Devon and said to David, what had happened. He said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll go ahead just the same." So we went ahead just the same. There was a bidding war. It was awful. His face was going more and more green. I was sitting there wringing my hands as the price went up. But eventually we were really bidding against someone that nobody knew, and they never did find out who it was. It was a businessman who'd come down from the north. And we never knew who it was. But anyway, he eventually pulled out, and that was it. One or two local farmers were there, and I didn't think they knew quite what to think of it. Anyway, they were very polite and very kind, and wished us well and so on. So with that done, and a huge debt round our neck, still not having sold the clinic, David moved in on Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve, 1982.
Yes. And I came down to the cottage and that we had over at Black Dog, which was near Tiverton. And then we spent Christmas down here. And then really, David didn't go back very often. He went back to finish off the private patients that he had. Yeah. He would go back about once a month and do an outpatients, and then gradually filtered off. I was left up at Catesham with the clinic because it still needed to be run. We hadn't sold it.
So you had the clinic and the cottage
and the farm.
At this point.
Yeah. Okay. And this went on until August. Our eldest daughter, Deirdre, decided she wanted to get married. And we said to her, "We're going to be living down in Devon, Undercleave, you to get married down there in our parish church."
Deirdre, were you surprised that Granny and Grandpa, left the clinic?
Not at all. Seen it coming for a while, and actually I was very pleased to get married in Devon. Always loved it down here.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Going back to your original question, actually, how did they come to buy the farm? You probably covered this in your previous session, but actually the link goes back much further. Because Moss's grandmother, Granny Fever, Edith Fever, was born in North Cornwall, Launceston. So there was, as a result, you used to spend your holidays as a child in the West Country quite often, didn't you? And always liked it down. Then when you inherited some money in the early 60s, you bought the cottage in Devon. It was a sort of bit of a magnet, I suppose. And then brother David went to boarding school in Devon. So we had every holiday as children down at the cottage in Devon. We never went anywhere else and loved it. So there was already that well-established link. So it made a lot of sense to buy a farm in Devon as well.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
It did look locally, but the local farms in Surrey and Sussex were too expensive.
Okay, so it wasn't that's interesting. So not completely out of the blue. You had a real anchor down in...
Not at all.
No, yes. The love of the countryside came to my sister and me because we were evacuated, as I think I've mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And after having been evacuated there during the war, we never wanted to go back and live in a town again, but of course we had to.
Yeah.
But whenever we could get down to the West Country, we did.
It was the same for me, going down to the cottage. I absolutely loved it. Always liked going, hated going back.
Yeah.
And, I developed a love for the country there, really.
Yeah.
I love it so much on the farm. I think it's
I think
from those days.
Yeah, I think you all got to love the country then, didn't you?
And we learnt about it.
Yeah.
We didn't know about it before. Living in Purley, it was very urban, wasn't it?
Yes.
So tell me a bit about your wedding then, Deirdre. How was that? So because you were in London at the time, presumably.
Yes, I was in London. I was working in Bristol actually, almost up until the time of the wedding as a junior doctor doing general medicine and gastroenterology. And then when we got married, my husband Mike got a job in London, so we moved to London. I started training in general practice, so I realised it wasn't for me fairly early on and moved back into hospital medicine. So the wedding was in June 1983. It was when it was because as a medical student I'd worked in South Africa in the Transkei, and coincidentally so had Mike. Before I met him, we didn't know each other then. He'd been working in the same hospital in the Transkei. And we both got it into our heads we'd like to go and work on the Transkei. And they said to us, if you're going to come back together, you must be married.
Okay.
And we were hoping to go, I think, in the August or the September of that year. So actually we got married sooner than we might have done. That was which was highly inconvenient for my parents because my sister, Alison, your mum, had only got married in the March before. So our poor parents had 2 weddings 3 months apart. Well, in the midst of moving down to the farm and still having the clinic on their hands. So they ran 2 weddings from a mobile home pretty well. And there were the shoe boxes full of invitations.
The mobile home was one that we bought whilst Undercleave was being renovated.
Okay.
We had to, the house was uninhabitable.
It was next to the house, there wasn't.
Yes, it was. It was in the yard. And it was extremely useful.
But we had a marvellous wedding considering the potential difficulties. We got married at Little Torrington Church. We had a lovely reception on the North Devon coast. Beautiful weather, wasn't it? And the weather turned just a few days before, and it was nice then for a month or 2. And although people had to travel, I think everybody enjoyed it.
Yes, definitely.
It seems apt where I can currently see where you got married.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
It's a stage throw from there.
Yeah. And as Deirdre mentioned, Alison, our youngest daughter, got married a few months earlier. And so all the time, as you say, we were trying to leave the clinic, purchase the farm. I was going to and fro between the 2 places, and you 2 were busy getting married. So I didn't spend an awful lot of time running this clinic anyway. Well, we did our best, but it all went off okay, so that was fine. And then so to go back to the actual selling off of the clinic, David's anaesthetist decided that he would get together 1 or 2 other surgeons, and they would buy it. There were about 3 of them, I think, and they bought it. And that was fine. And I think they paid for it in the August, and so we didn't have the Undercleave debt from the auction hanging around our neck for very long. So that was fine. So we moved out pretty quickly from Caterham, didn't we? Once we were able to do so, and entered a period of intense renovation. We hadn't realised before we saw Undercleave how inside some parts of it were actually falling down. One of the inside walls between the dining room and the kitchen was actually falling down. It was very wet. There'd been an old lady in it up to 3 years before we bought it. And she was an old Devon lady farmer who just sat in her kitchen and did very little. The neighbours really use the land as they wanted to. So the land wasn't in great shape. And the house was even worse. However, nothing venture, nothing gain, and the house was almost pulled apart. I had it refashioned inside into the way I wanted it. I wanted it was a 4-square Georgian house, and I wanted any visitors that came to have one side of it, and we would have the other side, as far as accommodating visitors were concerned. So that meant moving staircases and walls and doors. The roof was partly done. That wasn't too bad, strangely enough. But also there were the barns, which needed quite a lot of renovation as well. We had to have a new roof put on a very big barn, the main barn at the farm. All that was going on at the same time. Your kitchen, a little extension pulled down because it was absolutely dripping wet. And it was a big job. And I don't remember exactly how long it took, but it took the best part of a year. And going back now a little bit to what happened immediately after Deirdre's wedding, on the day after, the weather was fine. It was, I lost David for a bit. He seemed to have disappeared. And he disappeared for quite a long time.
Actually, you had visitors there that day, didn't you? Did you do
Yes.
lunch for some of the wedding guests?
Yes, that's right. And it turned out that he'd fortunately arrived back in sight again, as most of the visitors were arriving, so that was all right. And I sort of managed to whisper to, "Where have you been?" Well, I've just been talking to John Watkins, he was our neighbour at the time, to arrange for him to come and cut the grass. So, well, that's good, that's fine. The day after that, he disappeared again. And it turned out that he was actually helping John Watkins. I don't think he was driving his tractor, but he was helping him with cutting the grass. There was another helper, and I can't remember who it was. And they were haymaking. So it turned out, to cut a long story short, that he decided he was actually going to do the farming. David was. And I had absolutely no idea. I thought that we would buy the house and its surroundings, and he would rent out the rest straight away. But no, he decided to do it himself. And what's war? He was going to have animals.
Okay. So he never mentioned this to you in the sort of
No.
in the moved up note.
No.
Do you think he knew all along, or was it something he decided in the spur of the moment? Or?
No, he knew he was going to. He was going to farm. Definitely, he'd always wanted to, and he said, "I've done surgery, and now I'm going to do farming," which is what he always wanted.
Do you think he knew you would object if he mentioned it?
I suspect so.
Go and buy the
Yes,
Yeah.
fated company by the time I knew, and I think he would. I would have been aghast, you know. I probably wouldn't have stopped us buying it, but anyway, that was all right. I had plenty to do, sorting everything out in the house and so on, and so I think the first 2 years we were really sort of getting ourselves sorted, and then he bought Jersey cows because they're small, and neither of us were very big.
Yeah.
Not quite appreciating that Jersey cows produce an enormous amount of milk, and the cows began to get upset tummies and things, too much milk. And after doing this for about a year, we decided it wasn't working. So we got rid of all the Jerseys, and then he went into the Charolais, that's right. Because
French breed, aren't they?
they're French breed, and they're very big animals, and they're quite expensive animals, and you supposedly make up for that when you come to sell them. You get a good price for them. So that appealed to him. A big shed was built to accommodate these animals in the winter. And we found a lady who bred Charolais down in Cornwall, and we bought our first herd from her, and they were good. and that was fine. We got on well with them. Then we brought a bull, Yoo-hoo.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Stories about him.
Yoo-hoo was huge.
Yeah. Did he escape a few times? Is that right?
Yeah, one day I was driving up to the village, and I hadn't got very far off the farm, and the lane was very narrow, and I came across Yoo-hoo across the lane, its head in one side of the lane and its tail in the other. And the other side of Yoo-hoo, there was a car coming down. So I was one side. This chap who I didn't know was the other side. He got out of his car. I think actually he'd got lost. He got out of his car and he shouted to me, "Is this your animal?" So I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Well, fortunately for me, luck was on my side. Yoo-hoo's tail was actually over a wooden gate leading onto a field of ours. And the bigger the animal, very often, the quieter it is. So I rather tentatively got out of the car and opened the gate, and Yoo-hoo marvellously just backed onto our land, and I shut the gate, and then we sorted ourselves out in the car.
I must have thought you were sort of an expert.
Yes, obviously. So that was all right. And then Yoo-hoo produced calves, and they were lovely. That was fine. They were very small compared to Yoo-hoo, and they used to hide underneath him when the weather was rough. One year we had a flood, and we used to get floods every winter in that period. We don't get them now, so not like those floods. They were right up the gate high down.
This was in the 80s?
Yeah. But there was it was a big field that they were in, and it was next door to the river which ran through our land.
Yeah.
But there was a little bit of a rise, and all the cattle got onto this rise, and the calves sheltered under the adults with the water all around them. And we thought, how are we going to get them out to feed them? Yeah. So David, we thought about it a bit. The wood bordered that field, so he said, "Well, you go back and get a pail of barley, and we'll wave that at them and see if we can tempt them." So I did, and I brought it back. They didn't seem that interested, and they're still standing there. So what next? Anyway, we persisted. We just went on rattling and banging the pail of food and so on, just to get the bull's attention. Of course, if the bull wanted food, he'd come, and the rest would all follow him. So that eventually Yoo-hoo did gather what we were trying to do, and he did come across, and he led all the others across into the woods. So that was solved. But it's quite intimidating with very big animals to try and get them to do what you want them to do, not what they want to do. But anyway.
Did you feel out of your depths, like in those early
I felt totally out of our depth, but somehow David coped. You know, it's
he wasn't fazed by it. Just a different
not. I mean, he might say afterwards, "Oh, that was a bit the other bone." And I also felt quite embarrassed locally because although they were very good to us, the neighbours, there we were, Londoners coming down thinking that we could farm. And I still feel that, actually, you know, that although I needn't, because it's 40 years ago and we got a lot of experience under our belts by the time it finished. So anyway, there we are. If you're not born a farmer, it's different. It's got to be in your blood.
That's classic kind of farmers, but isn't there a saying, like, if you're not sort of third generation, you're not a local, or something like that.
That's right. Very much. It's got to be absolutely in your blood. And you know instinctively what to do pretty well.
Yeah.
Father he spent the first few years up until about the age of 4 on a small holding near Hastings, didn't he?
Well, his father had this small holding, and he brought in milk and sold the milk and the cream and butter and so on, because he had been gassed during the war and he wasn't able to work a proper.
And I think he said there was a link there with him wanting to farm, and he'd always subscribe to farming magazines and watch farming programs when he could.
The other link for him, actually, was his great-aunt, Aunt Bessie, who lived on a farm in Norfolk. And they used to go there for their school holidays in the summer quite a lot. And he remembered that quite well. So, yes, you're right. There was a link.
It had a long time to think about.
Yes.
He planned for many years as to what he would do without telling you.
Yes, I'm sure he did. Yes. But there we are. So, I mean, he was absolutely happy. He bought machinery, learnt how to use it all, and sort of managed, kept things going. If he wasn't very good at hedging or whatever, it didn't matter. They got done, and we then changed. Yes, and what happened was, the next thing that happened was that Yoo-hoo was in a pen in the yard, and he wanted to get out. So David was in the yard, and there seemed to be someone else with him. Someone perhaps was delivering something. I don't know. I don't remember who it was. Yoo-hoo wanted to get out, so he leapt right over quite a tall gateway, and that could have been very dangerous.
He damaged it, didn't he? There was a
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's quite right. And by now, I don't know at what stage that was. I've sort of lost count of the years a bit, but David was getting obviously older, and he fell out with the lady who supplied it for the animals, because I think she suddenly decided to lower the price, raise the price an awful lot, which was making it, it's not reasonable. Yeah.
Was this the lady in Cornwall? Sorry.
Yes, that's right. So, it was sort of the connection was fading a bit, and so he decided to change, and he changed over to Herefords, which, being a local, a sort of English cattle, as it were, rather than foreign animals, which I always maintain were a bit excitable because they were French. The Herefords were quiet, they were lovely, weren't they? And we bred from them quite a lot. We had a lot of calves. I did quite like doing the calves. But it was in the time just before big bales were being made, when you were...
These are the round ones? Is that
yes, the big round bales.
The older ones are the traditional sort of...
That's right, yes. And they were very heavy.
Yeah.
And at harvest time, I absolutely found awful. It was always hot. I was having to haul these bales up onto the trailer once they were baled up. It was really torture, I found. You got hot, you got tired. I had to stretch beyond my ability to throw the things up high while the chap that we employed was on the top of the pile, Anyway, I didn't have any choice. This is what had to be done. And then the time came when these big round bales came in, and although we didn't have the right equipment, we contracted the job out. And I always remember the first day that these contractors came, there were a couple of chaps, and they had spotless white T-shirts on, and clean jeans and so on. And when at the end of the day they'd loaded up, I don't know how many loads, but they'd been working hard all day without stopping. They seemed to be just as clean as when they started work. So that's amazing. And the answer is that with the newer machines, they hardly ever had to touch it. Okay. They certainly didn't have to haul them up on top of the thing. The machine did it for them. And I thought, well, that's the end of my harvesting life. Thank you very much. But I also remember the day when back in the old days of small bales, and we'd had a very heavy day, and it'd be very hot, But it was the last field we had to do, and we finished it. And I came back to the farm, and I just flopped out on the city. I told this story before. Perhaps we were just talking about it. Flopped back on the city and think, oh, thank God for that. When the phone rang, and it was some friends from Australia who were in the area, could they come and stay a couple of nights? So I had to go up the stairs and make up the beds and get a meal ready. And I thought, oh, I don't know, thank goodness now that perhaps it's the last bail for a year. But in fact, I never had to do it. It came after then. Changed by next year.
Am I right in thinking you had some people help out who were from Australia?
Yes.
Came for a few months.
When at one stage in his life, David went out to Australia for 6 months or so, and I got to know a lot of farming people. He had to travel around. He was doing GP surgery type stuff. He had to travel around a lot to farms, to patients and so on. And on the farms, he was interested, and people were very good. They took him round the farms and told them the different ways of farming in Australia and so on. And after a while, their sons would come over here and have a bit of English experience. And we had the sons of two families come over and help us. And it was marvellous because they were used to hard work. They were keen because they were travelling students, really. And they were really nice to have, yeah. So that was good. And apart from that, we had a helper, Michael Oak, who used to come regularly at the weekends to help us. I can't particularly remember others, but you could help. You could get help quite easily if you needed it.
Yeah.
There was David Murch, who was very helpful too.
David Murch helped us for our first 2 years. He wasn't a farmer, but he was a contractor for old-fashioned type harvesting, going either with his machinery and doing the work, or renting out his machinery for farmers to borrow during harvest. And he was actually a sort of engineer, really, of agricultural machinery.
Yeah.
But his history, his background, his family were farmers, and over very many years. At the time that we arrived, he'd actually sort of semi-retired, and when we were interested in Undercleave, some people, a couple in the village held the key, and they were lovely people. And every time we came down to look round, we'd call on them for the key, and there would always be a cup of something in the kitchen first, and so on. One day, it was about the last time before we actually bought it, I think, we got there, and it was usually, come in and have a cup of tea. We've got a visitor here who'd like to meet you.
Right.
And this chap was David Murch, and these friends of ours had reckoned up that we were going to need some help. David was looking for something to occupy himself with. Yeah. He introduced us, and he was delighted. He knew the Undercleave land very well, always had done. And he came and helped really teach David for the first 2 years.
Was he one of Grandpa's sort of closest friends, I suppose, down here?
Well, yes. He was the one that guided us all the time, and was a friend, and he was very loyal. He must have had a good laugh at some of the things we did or didn't do, but he was very good. Remained a friend until last year when he died.
2020.
Yeah.
They lived in the village here, just down.
Yes, just down the road.
Is it in the house on the corner you go?
Yes.
I remember, I think we stopped in a few times when we were young.
Yes, you would have done. Yes, yes. He was always interested in the family.
Yeah,
and he was absolutely great. And even in his last weeks and months, I would still call on him if I had a bit of a problem about something, whatever it was. Doesn't matter. It didn't have to be with farming. His advice was always very wise.
Yeah. I remember. I have vague memories of him, but I remember him being very, just kind and warm.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, that's interesting. I still remember that.
Very nice man, a gentleman, very nice man. So yes, I miss him a lot. So yes, so where have we got to?
So how long were you farming in total? And am I right in just thinking you did arable farming and cattle?
Mostly great. It was mostly grazing. Yeah. It's sort of what they call mixed farming. Yeah. I had chickens. I had geese at one time. I think at the height of our questionable farming, I was quite busy with poultry and so on, and enjoying it and joining in village things.
But the Hereford herd, was sold about 6 months before Father died. I seem to remember it was in May 2002. Father died in the November.
Yeah.
And part of that, I recall, was, well, he wasn't so well, but also he was losing his sight, wasn't he?
Yes, he
felt he couldn't look after the animals.
That's right.
Couldn't
No.
see properly.
No, that's right. He gradually deteriorated, and
But I think he got worse once they were sold, actually.
Yes, because the point of life had gone.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And it was also getting quite difficult because I was then having to look after them, and in the winter clean them out and do all that sort of thing. It's pretty heavy work.
That's a tremendous job. Had some health problems of your own, which had resolved, but you were having to get up every morning to muck out the chippens. And I remember helping you, and it was really heavy.
Yes,
and you were having to do that every day, weren't you?
Yes, it took 2 hours every morning. And then
kneading out this cow dung.
Yes.
Replacing it with
fresh straw. That was bales that had to be carried, and feed them hay into their troughs, and buckets of grain and so on for them. Yeah, it was very heavy work.
Yeah, and at the same time, you were looking after Grandpa then?
I was looking after Grandpa, and yes, it's it was just all work.
Yeah, well, I didn't realise. So you basically farmed for that whole 20-year period then?
Yeah.
If you just let the cows go in 6 months, you said, or in the May.
Yes, that's right.
Grandpa's dead.
And the last 6 months was basically looking after Grandpa.
You couldn't leave him for long at that point.
About 2 hours was the most, really, because although I would sometimes at some stage then I joined an indoor bowling club, which I enjoyed. And occasionally we would go out on a little outing all together and so on. And I used to like going on that. So I would go out then, but I would only leave him for 2 hours and then get back. Because although I would leave him, say, a sandwich or something to eat, he never got out of his chair to get it. Though he could have done it.
He was a bit low in mood, didn't he?
Very low, very depressed because he couldn't do anything. Very depressed.
He became sort of chair-shaped, poor thing. Because he sat in that chair for so long.
Yes.
He would listen to the radio. He tried to teach himself ancient Greek, but I think that was harder with his vision failing.
That's right. And he didn't really want anyone to come, He didn't really want the grandchildren to come. He was interested in them, but it was all too much of an upheaval, He couldn't cope with it, really. So we were pretty isolated for a little while.
Yeah.
But I didn't have time to feel isolated.
You went off to Seattle, didn't you? That was when you went with Alan.
That's right.
I came down to help look after
Yes.
Father.
Yes, and Mum used to come down sometimes to help you. Yes, it was only because you would come down.
Yeah.
I was able to. Yes. I had to go into hospital at one point, and I think you and Alison between you.
Yes.
So, yes.
Looks after the farm.
Looks
after the farm.
Looking after our father, really, and any other necessary tasks. I can't remember if you still had the hens then. If you did, you didn't have very many. No, it wasn't too arduous from the outside point of view.
That's right.
Yeah, the challenge was knowing really what our father wanted and what to give him to eat, and that's
yes, that's right.
I remember he liked Mars bars, didn't he?
He loved Mars bars. Yes, yeah, he did. Yes, it was sad really because he'd been a very active person, hadn't he? But on the other hand, because he was doing what he wanted to do, by the time he died, he'd done what he wanted to do.
the farm was a tremendous antidote to the National Health Service because although he loved surgery,
Yes.
he had some difficult times with some of his colleagues, and he wasn't one to sort of strive to sort of address those issues, was he?
No.
He didn't find that very easy. He was really just interested in the surgery. So he left the NHS actually early to run the clinic.
Yes.
Even though it was very challenging, wasn't it? I think it was marvellous just to get out of all of that, do something else which he really enjoyed. And he could put the past behind him.
That was partly due to me. I said, get out.
Yes. It was getting him down a lot, wasn't it?
Yes, because it was
surgery, but the working relationships, the NHS politics.
Mostly the NHS politics, because he started medicine before the NHS, where they were very much their own masters once they got up to the stage of being consultants and so on. And all his generation resented this terribly, that they were being told how to practice, in other words. And the new generation, of course, came along and had been brought up with it and didn't queer it. But he was just at the wrong moment. It was okay before, and it was okay these days. They've learnt, well, they don't know any different. But it was just that time between when the old ones had to bow to the new methods, and they didn't like it. The minute I can understand that completely.
I just want to go back to one point that you mentioned, which was when the sort of final cows went. What they were Herefords, was that right?
Yes.
In sort of May. Was that a big moment? Was that a sort of a huge sigh of relief, or you didn't really?
For me, it was huge relief. To father, it was very sad.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they were lovely animals. They were, once they got to know you and you got to know them, they were lovely animals. They blended into the countryside with their colouring. They got out sometimes, they showed a bit of spirit from time to time, but not anything very much.
They escaped, you mean, as in they got out?
Well, yes, occasionally, but the thing with Undercleave, it's completely surrounded by its own land, and it was a long way away from the main road, so it was not a worry them escaping. They weren't going to harm anything other than the damage they do to your own property, likely being over a gate or making a great hole in the hedge and someone's got to mend it, and that sort of thing. But
did you ever lose any in the river? Was that other people's cows?
No, we didn't lose any in the river. We nearly lost a calf once, but we managed to get it back. It had slid down. There's a very high bank on our side in places, and it had slid down the bank, which was a bit muddy at the time, and the mother couldn't get down to get it, so we managed to get down the road back. But otherwise, it was amazing how we didn't lose them. Once, I think it was fairly soon after we had the Herefords, they did cross the river. There was a ford in the river just at the junction of our land with the next door, and the herd did get across the river and go to the farm opposite once. And it was, as father said, it was a 10-mile round to go round and pick them all up. But, that didn't matter a lot. They didn't do any damage or anything.
Yeah.
It's just inconvenient.
Maybe should we pick up two final things? So in this kind of period between 1982 and 2002, your sister, who I know as Auntie Elaine, moved down, and also your son, David Shaw, came down.
Yeah.
Do you want to pick up both of those?
Yes. Because, as we mentioned before, Elaine and I were both loved the country and we loved Devon. Elaine was green with envy when we moved down, obviously, and she said, well, as soon as I can, she taught music. She said, as soon as I can afford to move down, I'd like to come down and join you there.
Yeah.
So it was about 5 years after we came down.
So this is 1987.
Yes. She said, could you look out for something for me? So one Saturday morning, we were both up in the town, and I'd bought a local paper, and we were sort of vaguely looking while waiting for your grandpa to come back from the shops. And I saw this cottage advertised in Weir Gifford, which is about 4 miles away. It looked very attractive. So we went down to see it straight away. And it was a lovely thatched cottage, very old. I thought Elaine would like it. Very nice site. Again, on the river, the same river, but set well up from it. Bus route. Very, very attractive, facing south. The whole village faces south. It's warm. I thought, I think she'll like this. So we went down, and the lady, the owner, was in the front garden.
Yeah.
So I said, I'd seen her house, her cottage in the paper and so on, and rather reluctantly at the time, she showed me round. And I don't know why she was reluctant, but I think she thought I was just sort of one of those people that go and look round. Kind of just for the just a pastime.
Yeah.
Anyway, I rang Elaine.
Maybe she didn't want to sell, really.
Yes, that could be it. Yes, because she was very keen on it. Yes, you're probably right, actually. I rang Elaine and said, come down straight away. She came down the next weekend, and that was it. She bought it. So there she was, and there I was, something we both wanted, and that was fine.
Yeah. How did you feel with Elaine moving closer? Was that?
Well, I felt fine because I knew that although at the time that she moved down, there wasn't much musical interest down in these parts, not classical music, as she was interested in. As she said, there was a dearth of music, and there certainly was. However, I don't know whether she stirred things up or what, but by some happy chance, I think probably one or two other people from our country moved down who were also interested in music, and they got together and they formed the Bideford Music Club, and that gave her a huge interest. And she, over time, picked up quite a few pupils for piano, singing, that sort of thing, and got herself very much involved in all the musical activities going around. So she settled very happily, and we didn't see each other on a regular basis, but, regular enough. And, of course, everything to do with the family she was able to join in with, and she liked that.
Yeah, I remember certainly seeing her quite a bit every time she come down.
Yeah. No, it was lovely, and you'd all go and see her a lot. Yeah, she was down.
Yeah, she loved it then. She loved it. She was a good gardener. She created a lovely garden. It was very beautiful. Lots of flowers.
Yes. Yes, it was. So that was a happy move.
And you were her closest relative, because your other sister Elizabeth had died.
Yes.
81, was it? 82?
Yes, it was before we moved down.
Yeah. And your parents had died, so it made sort of sense as well.
Yes, of course, we haven't mentioned she wasn't married, so so it was nice for her to. Yeah.
That was a bit. So 81, 82. That was a very busy period.
Very busy period indeed. Yes. Yes, it was very, very busy. Plus hay bales.
Okay, and then David came down. Do you remember when he moved down to Devon from? Was he in Sidcup or London or something?
He lived in Sidcup, yes. And once or twice we'd had to call on him. Once, both your father and I were unwell with quite bad flu, and your grandpa, not father, grandpa rang up David and said, "You've got to come down and look after us." So he did. He had a very understanding boss at the time, I think.
David was single then, and he had a bit more time than the rest.
Yes, that's true.
Oh, yeah.
And then it happened again.
You fell off a ladder and hurt your knee.
That's right. I broke my leg
and cracked through the knee joint.
That's right.
What were you doing on a ladder?
Oh, well, my chickens of the time used to lay eggs up in sort of hayloft.
Okay, yeah.
And the only way to get the eggs was to climb up by a fairly long ladder. And I'd been out bowling that afternoon, and it was raining hard. And Grandpa was asleep in a chair when I got back. So I thought, well, I'll pick up the eggs. So I put the ladder up. I was halfway up. And because the yard, which is concrete, was quite slippery from this rain, and it probably had some cow dung on it or something, the ladder went backwards. And so I went back underneath it, and I sort of collected my wits as fast as I could, because I thought if he's asleep, he's not going to come out and get me. Anyway, I managed to get out from under the ladder, decided I'd broken my leg, so I was crawling back to the farmhouse when he had woken up and realised I'd been out there quite a long time, so he was coming out and helped me in. But at the time, he also... Oh, I know what it was. I got inside and I said, well, the first thing is, please, I had willies on. I said, could you get my willy off? I think I've broken my leg. Yeah. So he tried to get it off. And he did eventually, but it was quite an effort, And the doorbell rang, of course.
Some more guests from Australia.
I think it was someone he knew, okay, but not enough to ask in and help or anything, Yeah. As he was talking to this man at the door, he suddenly came over sick and faint and had to dive into the loo and say to the man, "Excuse me, let's come back another time," So, and I think that was probably shock. I don't know, but maybe not. Anyway, from then on, he was terribly giddy and he couldn't stand up. He had to go and lie down. And so what do you call it when you...
vertigo.
Vertigo. So he went upstairs to lie down, and there was I with my broken leg downstairs.
Yeah. Did you call an ambulance? Or?
No, I didn't know what was happening to him, you see, because he'd been vomiting and, obviously pretty awful. I thought, well, I'll just have to hop around and take care. So I don't think we communicated again that day. I think I just stayed downstairs on the settee, and he was flat out upstairs. Anyway, the next day, I thought, well, I better get him something to eat. So I managed, I don't know, I managed and got him something to eat. Question was how to get it upstairs, because he still couldn't move without, everything going round. Mm. So I got it upstairs on hands and knees and so on, and this voice came out from the bed, "You'd better get yourself to hospital." So this is where David Murch came in. Okay. I rang him, I said, "David, I broke my leg, and David's not very well." And he said, "Don't worry, I'll come and I'll take you to outpatients and I'll stay with you until you can come back again," and so on. So, which he did. He stayed with me. I had his set, and plaster and so on, and he brought me back home. And there was I. I couldn't even actually lift my leg up to get over the front doorstep. I had to get it up over on my bottom. Anyway, there was I. Husband still flat out upstairs. But anyway, to cut a very long story short, we sort of managed. And after a few days, in fact, he had got hungry because he wasn't getting much food. He got up in the middle of the night and did a huge fry up. And so we sat up about 3 o'clock in the morning having a fry up. After that, I gradually, I got myself organised with a walking frame and a stick and all these things. And he eventually got better.
And was it then you got David down? I remember not knowing about this for several days. Did David come down?
Did he come down there?
He might have done.
I think he might have done.
That certainly was.
Yes, I think so. Maybe for a weekend or something. Yeah, we gradually got ourselves going. He decided he was going to go up to the shops to drive the Land Rover, which was quite an old Land Rover. And he knocked the front gate best. But he got up to the shops and did some necessary shopping.
And brother David, or your son David, then I think he wanted to come anyway because he'd been to school in North Devon and always liked this. But
yes,
he felt that, he would be more useful in North Devon than the sick cup.
Yeah. He says he moved down. Yes. He finally made the decision to come down. Yeah. And that was fine. He had a very nice little house in Torrington, just right for him. Mm. Helped us a lot, obviously, and got a job and settled down. Very happy to be in Devon.
He was a sort of school caretaker, sort of odd job now.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
private day and boarding school in.
Yeah, well, first of all, he got a job at PGL, which is a sort of holiday what do you call it? Some place where children
Outdoor activities.
Outdoor, yes, that's the word. Yeah.
Just outside. That's right. He did that for a bit, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And
PGL.
PGL, that's right. He quite enjoyed that. Then he got this job at the school, and he's very happy there. He did anything that needed doing, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then he met Ruth, and then they bought another house in Guscott, nearer to Bideford, but he still has his first little house here, which he rents out.
Yeah. When did they get married in this period? Did David get married in after 2002 or before 2002? No.
No, he married.
2003.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
His father, although he wasn't very well, he's still alive, and he met Ruth and liked her, and they were planning. They got engaged, hadn't they?
Yes.
Before he died.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. His father died in November 2002. They got married in July 2003 in church at Crediton.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But incidentally, that in earlier years when we were having all our holidays at the cottage, there was this young girl in the village who used to be in the village shop when they were sort of buying sweets and things. And the young girl used to look at the boys and wonder who they were and where they came from. And I think one of them did say hello or something, but not much more than that it was. And I think one day Ruth was sitting on, of course it was Ruth, sitting on the step outside the telephone box in the village, and they sort of walked past and eyed each other. I think David had you with him, and they...
Yes, and we were known as the children from London.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was that. And then after David had moved down here, they were both invited to the same christening.
Okay.
They didn't know each other. But because they were both single, their hosts decided to put them together. Okay. So they were sitting together at this christening, got talking, eventually clicked that David was one of their London children.
Yeah.
And Ruth was a farmer's daughter. Their family were farmers actually in a little village called Black Dog, which is where our cottage was.
Which is where we were going, where Ruth saw us. That's where the telephone
was. Yes.
And the village top.
Yes, right. So they got together after that, and discovered to their surprise that they had actually met before, and they all went on from there. Yeah. And they got married, and...
Okay, so this, at the end of this period, you lose Grandpa. You get a sort of daughter-in-law, I guess, just after. And you have David living with you, or close by, Auntie Elaine living close by.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Very good. Well, I'll pause it there. I think that was a good session.
You've been listening to Project Posterity by Philip Crumpler, available at philipcrumpler.com.